Hello, I'm Joel.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome to the Commander's Journey, the place where we discuss our favorite format of Magic, Commander, from the perspective of a new player
and an experienced one.
This journey is for new Magic players who are interested in Commander. So, welcome everybody to our first ever episode in quarantine.
This will be the start of our quarantine episodes as we deal with all the fun that comes from me and Joel now being in two separate locations, and we're recording remotely from each other.
Yeah, in all seriousness, we hope that everybody stays safe and protects themselves and their families and is all stocked up on toilet paper.
That's worth its weight in gold nowadays.
Yeah, no, I saw a friend on Facebook that was like, hey, everybody's like dying for toilet paper. I need rice. I'll trade you some toilet paper for some rice.
And then rice has been out the window too, yeah.
No, seriously. And then it was like half an hour later, there was a post of his picture of his rice that he had gotten. Somebody came within 30 minutes to his house to trade toilet paper for rice. And everybody was like, whoa, that was quick. And it was just like, yeah, I guess there's a huge need for toilet paper.
Exactly right. God, just, don't stock up on these things, guys. Everyone needs them, especially the masks, too. Don't hoard masks. Masks don't work if we all don't have masks. I'm just throwing that out there. If the sick people don't have the masks, it doesn't do you any good if you're the only one with a mask.
Yeah, there's enough to go around. Put it out there. And there's enough being produced. Not enough masks, but there's enough toilet paper being produced. If we all just take our fair share, we'll be fine. But yeah, hope everybody's safe and we all get through this. And I know there's a lot you could talk about on that, but we're not going to get into that. Hopefully this is a little bit of an escape and we can talk a little bit about Commander and Magic and some fun. Because we're stoked. We've been stuck in here, and we've both been building new decks just because we got like little to do. And I know a lot of people go online and build decks. It's pretty fun. So take advantage of the time. Enjoy your family. Enjoy some Magic. So today we want to talk about helping some good cards that can help your monocolored decks. So maybe you have some monocolored decks. Maybe you're playing mono blue, mono red, mono white, commanders, mono black, which I like to play. And you'll find in the different colors in the color pie are better at some things and not as good at other things. If you're in blue, say you're playing Teferi and you're in blue, monocolored deck, you can draw cards excellent, but you might have a bit more difficulty with ramp or with something else. And same with the other colors and the different effects. So we just want to talk about some colorless cards, mostly artifacts and some lands that'll help you with ramp. And then some that'll also, next we want to talk about some that'll help you with some card draw and others that will help you with removal. Excuse me. So if you're struggling with any of those types of effects in your decks, this is the episode for you. We're just going to run through these, read them mostly, and talk a minute about them. But yeah, these are great cards that put in your monocolor decks, and we hope it helps you.
Exactly. So we'll head right into it. And this card is one of the ones that definitely is like, whoa, I'm playing monocolor. I get to use this card. It's so fantastic in a monocolored deck. And that card is Cage Sun. It's 6 generic mana for an artifact. As Cage Sun enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control the chosen colors get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability causes you to add 1 or more mana of the chosen color, add 1 additional mana of that color. This is really powerful, and especially in a monocolored deck, you can all of a sudden get some big mana really quick.
That's the mono card right there.
Exactly. And then the other one is its brother, a Gauntlet of Power, which is pretty much the same thing, but it costs 1 generic mana less, so it's only 5. And its says whenever a basic land is tapped for mana of the chosen color, its controller adds 1 mana of that color to his or her mana pool. The difference between the two is Gauntlet of Power will help your opponents as well, though I still think it's probably worth playing. It's a little weaker than Cage Sun, but if you need that effect, having 2 definitely doesn't hurt. And as the monocolored player, chances are, unless someone else is playing monocolor of that exact same color, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck with that.
You'll get a little bit more value, exactly. So Cage Sun, Gauntlet of Power. Insta ads right there. Another really good ramp card is Sword of the Animist. It's 2 generic mana for a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library and equip for 2. So it's great because it allows you to go search for basic land just on the attack trigger. So especially if you got a bunch of creatures in green or in red or in any color, really, you're just going to get those basic lands.
So our next ones are some of the go-to creatures for ramp. Honestly, these are fantastic in any color deck, not just monocolor, but definitely will help out there as well. First one is Solemn Simulacrum. It's 4 generic mana for an artifact creature golem. When Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. And when Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. It's a 2/2. We've talked about him before, and we'll talk about him again. He is fantastic, and he definitely helps out with those colors that struggle with ramp. The other one is Burnished Heart, which is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature elk. And that says for 3 and sacrifice it, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. It's a 2/2. Also, really very powerful ability.
And it's good to have it not just rocks, but be able to have these attached to creatures as well. It gives you a little bit more flexibility in your deck building.
Exactly. God knows you can block with a Solemn Simulacrum, and you're okay with it, and your opponent might not be as happy with it.
Exactly. Another really good card, and they just reprinted this in the mystery boosters. And that's actually how I found out about the card personally. But it's a great card. It's Helm of Awakening. For 2 generic mana, it's an artifact. It says all spells cost 1 generic mana less to play. It's really good because it affects everything on your board. It makes everything a little bit cheaper. And if you're running, say, 1-drop artifacts like maybe a Soul Ring in your deck, you're making all those 1-drop artifacts free. You just play them as they are. It's great.
So another fantastic cycle is Cold Steel Heart, as well as the Diamond Cycle. Now, Cold Steel Heart says it's for 2 generic. It's a snow artifact. When it enters the battlefield tapped, and as it enters the battlefield, choose a color, and you tap 1 mana of the chosen color. And there's also the Diamond Cycle, which does the same thing, but of course, there's a specific color for each.
Exactly. Another really great card, and I know it's a go-to for Mitch on the Commander's Quarters. It's a great card. Wayfarer's Bauble. For 1, it's an artifact. 2, when you tap it, you sacrifice Wayfarer's Bauble, search your library for a basic land card, and put that card into play tapped. Then shuffle your library. And as a new player, it's hard sometimes to see these cards and see why they're really good. And a card like this, I found out as I played it more, that if I'm able to get this out on turn 1, I'm putting it down on turn 1, and on turn 2, I'm able to sacrifice and go get a card and ramp up that early in the game. So it really has good effects.
You know, I used to see Wayfarer's Bauble all the time. I feel like as Commander's gotten a little more support over the years, you see it less and less, but it's still a fantastic card, and definitely one of those legacy cards that it works great now and worked great then. So the next one we have is the Medallion Cycle. Now, these are great in monocolor. Example one, such as Jet Medallion, which is 2 generic mana for an artifact, and it says black spells you cost 1 less to cast. Of course, the cycle each is a different color, and they're just fantastic.
Great cards. Another really good card for ramp is Thematic Compass. 2 generic mana for an artifact. For 3 and tapping it, you search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library so you can go search up something. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, you transform Thematic Compass. When you transform it, it becomes Spires of Erasca, which is a land that can tap for colorless, or you can tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So it becomes a really good way to just protect yourself as well.
You know, I like that Thematic Compass starts out as a ramp spell early in the game, and then as the game gets farther along, becomes like pretty much a Maze of Ith. It's one of those nice early game, nice late game, always going to have that functionality. The last one we have is the newest one, and boy, is it fantastic. And that is NYX Lotus. Now, NYX Lotus is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact. Enters the battlefield tapped. Tap it and choose a color. Add an amount of mana equal to your devotion to that color. Boy, is it fantastic. It all of a sudden later in the game it'll start tapping for a ridiculous amount of mana. But even when you get it out, as long as you have something else with a devotion, it'll still tap for something. So
I love this card.
It's got to keep something in play.
I love this card in my mono black deck, NYX Lotus. Some people had it. I've seen people throw an issue around because it comes in tapped, but I mean, regularly I'll have from anywhere from 4 to 10 black pips out at a time, and this rock is just really powerful because my devotion to black is usually a lot in that deck. It's just a really good rock.
Even if it comes into play tapped, if the next turn you're tapping it for like 4 or 5 mana, that's ridiculous. It already paid for itself. I mean, and sometimes you get astronomically huge.
Exactly. It's pretty powerful. And its brother, well, it's not its brother, but if you look at kind of where NYX Lotus was inspired from, the earlier the land Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which is a legendary land. You tap it, you add 1 to your mana pool, or for 2 and you can tap it, you choose a color, add to your mana pool any amount of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So it's a very similar effect, but it's on a land. You have to 2 and tap it, but you can again ramp up pretty quickly with that. And like you were telling me earlier, it's harder to deal with because it's land. Not everybody has land removal. People usually have artifact removal, but land removal is not as common.
Exactly. And another land that will help you out with the ramp, got another land up in here, is a classic, and that's Myriad Landscape. Now, Myriad Landscape enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for a colorless mana or 2 and tap, sacrifice it to search your library for 2 basic lands that share a land type. And of course, that downside of sharing a land type is not a downside because you're only playing 1 color. So it's not a big deal in the slightest.
You should actually only have 2 basic lands of the same land type.
Exactly.
So the next section we want to talk about a few cards, again, that are colors. So go in any of your colored, monocolored decks that help you in the area of card draw. So say you're in white and all you can play is a Mentor of the Meek or a few of these other effects that seem a little bit more like you have a bunch of get around. These are cards you can add to those decks to help you out.
You know, this one too, Joel actually showed me. I saw it when it came out in the spoilers. I just don't think I gave it its due. And all of a sudden, Joel's playing his mono black deck, and I'm really seeing it go off. And I'm like, holy cow, I really was sleeping on this thing. And that card is Endless Atlas. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact, 2 and tap it, draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. And of course, in a monocolor deck, that's really easy to do.
Oh yeah, it's because you're going to run 20 plus lands that are all have the same name theoretically.
So I play this in a Boros deck too. As long as I had a consistent way to, we're playing with a lot of basics, which you may or may not be. I think this is worth playing in that scenario as well.
Yeah, really good card. Another really good one that I like because of the repeatability of it is Mind's Eye. For 5 generic mana, it's an artifact that whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1, and if you do, draw a card. So on each person's, after their upkeep, when they draw a card, you can choose to pay to draw yourself some cards, and especially in colors where you don't have really good card draw, this can be very helpful.
So whenever someone's doing a Ristic study, you can hop on that bandwagon too.
Oh, yeah.
I'll also draw a card when you do that.
Yeah, you're like, I'm just in, mono red. I don't really have I got a Mind's Eye, and you got a Ristic study. We're all good.
So another one, it's pretty good. I definitely like it because you kind of just leave it by itself. It'll give you that value, and it has other abilities as well, but you can kind of just sit there. And that's Staff of Nin. It's 6 generic mana for an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card, so you get to pretty much draw 2 cards per turn. And you can tap it to deal 1 damage to any target. What's nice about this one, it's a little expensive on the mana cost side. 6 mana is nothing to squawk at, but It's one of those ones that you'll be surprised. It doesn't get targeted very often, especially if you're not taking out things left and right with it. So most people will just let you sit on it, and all of a sudden you're getting 2 cards per turn. I mean, it's basically a Phyrexian arena.
It is basically a Phyrexian arena. You're right. Um, you're right. Some of these it is a little bit more mana the to get it out, but that's something you have to do because in your color you might not have great card draw. But once it's out, the repeatability of it's super helpful. And I think if you play more casually like we do, you're not in like a hyper competitive environment. It could be very good in your games. The next one is a go-to. It's probably one of the best out there as far as card draw is concerned. And I have one of these in most of my decks, period. And that's Skull Clamp. For 1 generic mana, it's an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1, -1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. Equip for 1. So that equipped creature getting +1, -1. What's so great about that? Well, how many 1/1s can you make? Like, how many 1/1 tokens can you make? Oh, wait, I can just equip this to that. Give myself some, draw 2 cards each time. I can use my tokens for fodder. It's awesome. Great card. Love this card.
Fantastic. And the last one we're going to talk about that's an artifact that will help you out with your card draw is Seers Sundial. That's 4 generic mana. It has landfall. Whenever land enters a battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 if you do draw a card. And this is fantastic in those colors that really, chances like white, especially where you can put a lot of planes in your hand. It's a little harder to get them out in the battlefield. But as long as you're consistently playing a land every turn and you have the ability to tap 2, you can get a card out of it.
It's really good. That landfall trigger is really good. And then the last one we'll talk about for card draw, and that can go in any deck, any monocolored deck, is Arch of Erazka. It's a land, has Ascend, so if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. You could tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, or 5 and tap it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if you have the City's Blessing. Now, it is more. It costs 5 and tap to draw a card, but in black you might have Castle Lochthwain, but in red you don't. So Arch of Erazka could help in that situation. Same kind of situation.
Yeah, it can help out, and sometimes you take those turns off, or you just have a turn where you have a lot of extra mana, you can get a card draw of it, but sometimes too you're just digging for an answer. And even though it's expensive, it's on a land too, so you have that extra oomph like Nykthos did. It's a little more protected and a little more likely to fly underneath the radar.
Yeah, people might not notice as much. And so the last section we want to talk about is removal. So, yeah, of course, if you're playing mono white, you're going to have plenty of removal. And in black, you're going to be able to knock creatures out. And in red, you can probably interact with some artifacts. In green, you can mess around with some enchantments or artifacts. But you don't always have the great removal in all the different colors. So these are some really good permanent removals or some board wipes you can add to any deck, any monocolor deck especially, just to help you out. And so let's do that one.
So there you go. So our first one we have was helpful because it can be a board wipe or it can be a little more targeted depending on what's in play. And that's Steel Hellkite. It's 6 generic mana for an artifact creature dragon. Has flying. You can tap 2 and it'll get +1/+0 until end of turn, that fire breathing. And then it has X. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt combat damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. It's a 5/5. So as long as you can get into swing with Steel Hellkite and deal that damage, you can pretty much get rid of any specific CMC that you want in play. And that can be really beneficial if you're only taking out some things. If you have a high CMC deck or a low CMC deck, you can aim it a little bit as well.
That's very nice. So it has that flexibility. It can be scarier than it looks. Some people might overlook this card, but it can be really scary if you're going up against it for sure.
And especially in colors that need that removal. I have a tendency to try to sneak in a Steel Hellkite when I can.
Mm-hmm. Another really good card, and a little more straightforward, is Scour from Existence. It's 7 generic mana for an instant, and it just says exile target permanent. And what's really great about that, obviously, are those 2 keywords, exile and permanent. So you could just get rid of something. It does cost 7 generic mana, which is a bit steep, but again, like um, in certain colors, you need that help. So it's a good card for helping that out. Another really good one is Spine of Ishsa is also 7 generic mana. And it's an artifact when Spine of Ishsa enters the battlefield, destroy target permanent. When the Spine of Ishsa is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Spine of Ishsa to its owner's hand. So it doesn't exile, but it destroys a permanent. But what's nice about this one is that you can just keep getting it back to your hand every time it's put into a graveyard. So unless somebody else exiles it, you're going to have access to this for a minute.
I like Spine of Ishsaw too, in that you do get that replayability, especially if you have the ability to sacrifice artifacts. All of a sudden, you're in control of that. I know that's rather nice.
So that would be good for Corvo then, huh?
Oh, that'd be great for Corvold. Corvold doesn't need the destruction effect like in a lot of other colors do. It's actually it's in a pretty good spot for it. But let's say Corvold, is in different colors though. That's looking real good for that. Another one that we have is I like it because early on it's a Monarch and later in the game it actually has some playability. And that's Unstable Obelisk. It's 3 generic mana for an artifact. You tap it, add a colorless. But later in the game you can tap 7 and tap it, sacrifice it, and destroy target permanent. So it's a nice destruction effect later in the game, but a ramp spell early on or a rock. So that way you can take advantage of it.
Yeah, early and late game card there. Very good. The next one is a land, so it's again harder. People don't usually blow lands up that much, so especially you don't want to blow up a blast zone because it might blast in your face, right? That was terrible. The next card is Blast Zone. It's a land. It enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it, and then you could tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool. Or for XX, you can tap it to put X charge counters on Blast Zone. Or for 3, you can tap it to sacrifice Blast Zone. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So basically, you want to be paying XX and tapping to put X amount of charge counters on Blast Zone so that you can get it up to the CMC that you need to wipe out all the creatures across from you that cost that much CMC. Is there a better way to explain that, Alex? Easier way to understand that?
The best way I have to do it is, in terms of the most confusing part of it, that looks like to me for a newer player, is that XX tap, put X charge counters on Blast Zone. I would look at it this way. You're always going to put twice in the amount of mana that you want charge counters for. So if you want 1 charge counter, it's going to cost you 2 mana. If you want 2 charge counters, it's going to cost you 4 mana. So it's always going to be double whatever amount of charge counters you're trying to put on it.
And then if you have 3 charge counters on it, and there's creatures that are 3 CMC, and you blow it up, everything on the board with 3 CMC is going to die.
Exactly. Not just your opponents, and it's all non-land permanent. So that includes artifacts, and that includes enchantments, planeswalkers. You'll get rid of all of them. And what is nice about it too is, when you're doing these types of effect, you have the ability to go big, but often you're trying to hit something like in the 3 CMC range or the 4 CMC range. And over a couple turns, you can really build it up and, hold it there. And there's a certain playability to just leaving it on the battlefield at that amount. And then all of a sudden people are trying to avoid playing things for that CMC. They don't want to play it. So it'll help slow down the game even before it destroys anything.
It seems to me this would be really good if you had a card that helped untap it. So say somebody puts out a threat, so you can pay whatever to put your charge counters on and tap it, and you have a way to untap it somehow, then pay into it to destroy it right away instead of having to wait a whole turn to come back around.
I've seen that work, and I know I like this one especially too in either green or blue, where green you get a lot of mana really fast, and they have trouble dealing with creatures, especially for a wide burst of creatures. So that can help with that. I know in blue too, if you combine this with a card like High Tide, which will add a lot of mana, you can use that to pump up for a turn just to really start getting a good amount of charge counters on Blast Zone, and then just kind of hold it there and keep something at bay or keep some things in people's hands that you might not even realize.
That's true.
So another card that's fantastic, and we're going to move more into board wipes at this point, is a card that is a go-to. Rawls Disc. It's 4 generic mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, but you, for 1 generic mana, and tap it, destroy all artifact, creatures, and enchantments. And I'll tell you, if I'm playing mono black or mono red where I can't deal with enchantments, I'm definitely playing an Rawls.
Really good card. It's good in even in non-mono color, but especially monocolor decks where you don't have as many board wipes. It's really good to have. And the last one we're going to talk about is another board wipe. It's Oblivion Stone for 3 generic mana. It's an artifact. So 4 and tap it. You can put a fate counter on target permanent. And then for 5 and tap, you sacrifice Oblivion Stone, destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters from all permanents. So you're putting fate counters basically maybe on 1 or more of your things, and then you can 5 and tap it to wipe everything else out. And it is a little bit harder to get to it again with the amount of mana you have to pay and tapping it and such, but when you don't have a lot of good options, this is one to go to.
And what's nice about Oblivion Stone too is, unlike a lot of board wipes that do this, you can spare your things. You know, it takes a couple turns unless you have some untapped shenanigans to get to that point. But you can, you know, spare 1 or 2 things and then tap out. Or if you just need that board wipe right then and there, it's going to cost you 8 mana. But you can just set it out and tap it immediately and go down.
Well, that is going to do it today. I hope everybody got some good information on some good ramps, some good card draws, some good removal to add to your monocolor decks. We're going to do more of these in the future, and we'll focus on the different colors, maybe their strengths and their weaknesses, and cards that can help. Some ones that might seem obvious and others that might fly under the radar a little bit. But again, everybody stay safe. Be healthy, love your families and the people around you, and play a lot of Commander. Right?
Yeah, I would definitely. This is the opportunity, I'll tell you that.
You might not have to go to everybody's house to do it, but I mean, we got Cockatrice, there's Untap In, everybody's making Discord servers. There's a lot of ways to play.
Daz Commander on it.
There you go. So keep playing, keep having fun, and stay safe.
See you.